I also had to wrestle with the terrifying thought of like, I might need to go figure out something else, which was one of the scariest things that could have even crossed my mind, because at that time it was of course my professional life, but it was also my community, a lot of where I gained spiritual development. So it was all the things like leadership and friendship and my spiritual life and my sense of what I had to offer to the world.
Welcome to the In Between, a space for anyone navigating from the familiar to the unknown. Whether you're facing a personal, professional, or spiritual disruption, these conversations are here to help guide you through the questions, uncertainties, and opportunities that come with change. Hear from leaders, thinkers, and storytellers who found their way forward, and learn how you can too. No matter where you're starting, you don't have to navigate this alone. Today, I'm sitting down with Tracey Gee, leadership coach, consultant, and speaker. She's certified in StrengthsFinder, Cultural Intelligence, the Enneagram, and Working Genius. Her new book, The Magic of Knowing What You Want, is a guide to unearthing the wisdom of our desires, showing us how to pay attention to what brings us alive to unlock clarity, alignment, and flourishing. So, Tracey, I'm so grateful to have this conversation with you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Evan.
Yes, of course. So you've coached leaders through all kinds of transitions. Can you share a bit of your own journey, like what led you to this work? And why did this question of desire become so central for you?
Well, I went through a huge disruption in my own life. I know that's a lot of the work that you do. And I had worked for my whole career in the same Christian ministry, and I thought that would be my future path. The thought had crossed my head, like, I might retire having only worked in this one org. But something I talk about in the book is that I went up for promotion, got really excited about this potential role, and then did not get it. And, I've been through things like that before, but for whatever reason, this particular disappointment hit me so hard. I went into just a huge emotional spiral, like questioning things that I had assumed, questioning whether I wanted to stay in this org, questioning my value there. And, I also had to wrestle with the terrifying thought of like, I might need to go figure out something else, which was one of the scariest things that could have even crossed my mind, because at that time it was of course my professional life, but it was also my community, a lot of where I gained, spiritual development. So it was all the things like leadership and friendship and my spiritual life and my sense of what I had to offer to the world. So it really went to a lot of core things of being, was like wrapped up in the thought of, oh my goodness, maybe I'm going to need to figure out a whole other path this has not crossed my mind before. I was, in my 40s. It just felt like, is this even possible? Like, have I missed the train? Is this way too late to even have anything be possible? It's just so a million questions, literally. And like I said, a lot of emotional angst, a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear, a lot of anger at some points. And I really was struggling with that. And so in that place, I was highly aware, like, I can't begin to put together any kind of plan for what's next. I can barely see straight. My husband was like, honey, I have never seen you like this before. And, we'd been married for over 15 years by then, and, friends were saying the same thing. And I was like, I know, I don't recognize myself. I can't even begin to imagine what might be next. I'm so disoriented. And it was in that space where I felt a still small invitation. I would say it was from God to just focus very simply. And I was like, okay, for 40 days, I'm going to do one thing each day, simply because I genuinely want to. And it felt like, okay, that I can manage. For whatever reason, a lot of other things feel very overwhelming. this I can do. And it was very simple stuff. Like I chaperoned a field trip with my son's, second grade class. I, learned how to cook a dish I'd wanted to make. I planted tomatoes in my yard unsuccessfully, but like things like this, very simple. And it was during that time that I felt like I started to come back to myself and feel more connected to my life and to God and to me. And I also noticed at the same time, like, ooh, is this okay? Am I allowed to think about this? Am I allowed to do something just because I want to versus because other people expect me to, or because it adds value somehow to someone else, or it fulfills something bigger than me. So it was in that quietness that I started to feel myself again. It started to feel like I could, begin to have some hope for my future, begin to have hope that God could do something, that maybe there were possibilities, but it was all around that place of what did I want? And looking back now, I think it's because our desires are something you can't fake something like that. You can't manufacture that. And I think a lot of my life had become so much more externally focused, like what other people want? What did they expect me? What is the mold I should fit into? And not always in a nefarious way, but just in a like, I'm trying to, be collaborative, or I'm trying to add, all those things. But I think that question of like, what do I truly, really want? When I'm honest, when it's just me and God, what would I say to that? And at first it kind of scared me because I didn't know. But I felt like that 40-day practice was a discipline in learning how to listen to that and learning how to, again, listen to myself. And I think through that, ultimately learn how to listen to God in a new way.
I love one of the things you said was that it helped you to begin imagining what's next. And I'm sure if someone were to try that same experiment, they might experiment with different activities or things that they want to do. But what was it about planting tomatoes or taking your kid on the field trip, being the chaperone? Like, what do you think it was about those things that began to unlock aspects of your imagination or to begin thinking about a new future?
Yeah, at the time I remember wrestling with this, like, is this, important enough to even spend time on? This seems really small.
Mm,
And I think, again, looking back, I think the value of it was more, not so much in the activities themselves, as you say, but much more about a practice of being open, being curious, and then linking that curiosity to a step of action, and to move toward that curiosity and to move toward that place of authenticity. And I think it was important actually that it was just for me, and it didn't involve most cases, anybody else, or it didn't come with anything formal or a leadership role or anything like that. It was this space just exists for me. And I think it helped me to learn how to be honest with myself and learn how to not filter, because I think I had also just gotten in a habit of like, well, I might feel drawn to this. I might want that, but I don't pay attention to that. I have to push that down because I've got other stuff I need to focus on that everyone else around me is telling me is important. So that muscle, I think of it as like, when you work out, you develop your muscles, you get stronger. It was that muscle getting stronger to learn how to pay attention to what just felt true and real and honest. And I think that set the foundation for bigger questions to come. So, in and of itself, it wasn't like world changing, life changing. Again, planting tomatoes, not that big of a deal. But again, I think it was those baby steps to build up that muscle memory so that when bigger decisions came or bigger hopes and desires came later, For example, writing a book, it helped me learn how to not shove that to the side because I had already learned and practiced with some of these smaller things.
Hey friends, I want to pause just for a moment. If you're navigating the complex and emotional process of leaving a mission-driven role, whether that's been ministry, nonprofit work, or any purpose-driven career, you're not just looking for a new job. You're wrestling with things like the personal, professional, and spiritual dynamics that come with all of this. Maybe you're asking things like, who am I outside of this role? What skills do I even have that can translate into the future? Will I ever find work that feels meaningful again? If this is resonating, download Finding Your Way to Flourishing. It's a free guide that I've put together for mission-driven leaders who find themselves in the midst of transition. This isn't just another guide, it's a thoughtfully crafted resource that's designed to help you begin processing your identity beyond the role that you're leaving. It can help you pinpoint which skills you can confidently bring into your new and next role. And it'll help you lean into your faith and find peace during the midst of this uncertainty. Not overwhelming, it's not complicated. It's just the first step to getting some clarity and moving forward. You don't have to figure this all out alone, and I'd love to walk this journey with you. This guide is completely free, and you can grab your copy today by clicking the link in the description or in the show notes. Let's start making some sense of this transition together. Okay, now back to the conversation.
Why do you think we have a tendency to like shove those things aside or shove them down or ignore them or even feel guilt or shame or instead of being curious? And I particularly am thinking through the lens of people with faith backgrounds or people that serve in those types of contexts. Why do you think that is a thing? Or is it a thing?
It's definitely a thing. I'm just trying to think, how much time do we have, Evan? Um, I think at the core, it is related to having a small or narrow view of God.
Hmm.
And I think we can tend to find comfort in making God smaller and black or white, this or that, good and bad, which there's a time and a place for that, of course. But part of, I believe, maturing in our faith is that the way that we relate to God also matures. You know, that was some of my thing was like, okay, I've been a very committed follower of Jesus for over 20 years. Why do I still feel like everything I want is bad and God would be angry at me if I were to even like admit that I wanted some of these things? And that started to strike me as incongruent with a God who is generous, who created us, who is creative himself. It started to feel overly limiting. So I think sometimes for some of us, it can be just rooted in how do we even image God? You know, I've had people say to me, well, what if I want something and that's not what God wants for me? And I'm like, okay, well, don't you think that God could talk to you about that God could redirect you in that if that were the case, God could be in that and could have a conversation with you about that. And that would be all right with God. You know, like it just, so I think it's out of really good reasons. Like we want to live lives that are faithful, obedient, and all those things. But then I think it's kind of stuck on this narrow view of what that means. And so we've learned a lot of times that God's will, I've heard this actually in literal sermons, God's will, if you're not, usually it's phrased like, if you're thinking about what you want, you don't care enough about what God wants. If you're thinking about your desires, you're not thinking enough about God's will. And those things are seen as diametrically opposed. And I don't subscribe to that anymore. And I know that's like a very common way of thinking, and it's a nice and neat way of thinking, but I don't think that accurately reflects the character of God. who is, said to dwell in us. And we've had the Spirit deposited in our lives and in our true selves and in how we've been created and how we embody that. And so I have to think that God wants to talk to us about this, that God cares about this, that God is into that, and that's a really great place to wrestle with some of these questions. Because even if someone's trying to figure out, say, like, what is their purpose, which is often like, that's something that we're like, that's okay. You can do that, right?
Yeah.
But I think a much more real, again, honest, authentic door into that is to start with, but what do you genuinely love? What lights you up? What doesn't? What do you want? What do you not? And if we can come at those bigger purpose type questions from that place, I think we get to a better place of what it looks like for us to bear God's image in the world and in the unique way that we've been created by God, because we all do that uniquely.
Mm.
We all bear God's image. We all do that in a unique way based on how we've been created and our values, our experiences, our story, our personality, all these things, and our desires.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I think it comes down to a lot of very limiting ways to see ourselves and to see God and to see paths to the kind of clarity that I think we all long for, but we cut ourselves off from asking those questions to begin with.
How do we begin to do that? I mean, you said you can't fake desire. And for people that feel stuck or like they've been living on autopilot, why is tapping into desire such a helpful starting point?
I find it to be helpful because it just doesn't allow you to start in an overly grandiose way, right? Sometimes, again, well-meaningly, we're like, well, I want to be a good person. I want to have a positive impact on the world, all wonderful things. But I think when we go so big, sometimes we are not rooting that impulse to create good in the world, again, in the real soil of our own lives. And it starts to feel disconnected. I've talked to a lot of people who are like, yeah, I pursued this whole path because I thought it seemed great, made sense, or I could make a case for why this would be good, but just was so disconnected from their personhood and their true selves. So I think that ability to start smaller, because that's how it feels to me. I don't know if it feels that way to other people, but yeah, I think when we start to think about like, yeah, what is this for? It can feel very big, very lofty, very noble, which is, again, not a bad instinct. But I think if we ignore the small truths of ourselves and who we are in our wholeness, I think we start to miss and overlook things that are actually really important. So with the folks that I work with, when we start with, what do you want? Again, that can be a scary question for some, depending on, your mindset or beliefs around that. But I find that it gets to that place of honesty and realness and helps you not to ignore little sparks of life that I think are really, really essential in building a life that feels joyful and authentic and impactful.
When I pastored up until 2020, and I had done that my whole career for 18 years and had been wrestling with the idea of just moving on or doing something different. And since then, I've been able to just describe how some of what I do is just a different context. That was one type of context to, if you want to call it calling, or to live in my purpose, or to do ministry type work, or to serve. That was one context, but certainly we carry those things with us, and there's lots of context where those types of strengths, giftings, desires can flourish and operate. And I wrestled with those things for probably a couple years before I finally made the decision. I had this sense as I was wrestling with what to do, almost as if I felt like God asked me, well, what do
Mhm.
you want to do?
Mm. Mhm.
We get so focused on, oh, I don't want to miss God's plan or God's path or God's purpose
Mhm.
or God's will. And I more just felt like this assurance that if you go this way or if you go this way, I'm
Yeah.
going to be with you.
Mhm.
And it was extremely freeing for me to not limit my life to necessarily one context.
Yeah.
And so, you had mentioned some of this living under expectations from others. How do you begin then if we pay attention to that desire? Some of us we have lived on autopilot for so long or have ignored those things for so long. Like someone right now who has the slightest inkling of, wait a second, I do think that there are other things that I want or things that seem important to me that I've just never paid attention to
Mhm.
or given a second thought to.
Mhm.
What do they do?
Mhm.
How do they pursue that?
Mhm. Well, first of all, I love that you're using that word autopilot. I think that's very accurate. It's very true. I've had people describe their experience sometimes that way. Like, I feel like I'm just living on autopilot. I
Hmm.
want to wake up to that. So I think that's a really good image. Um, I think a place that people can start, where I often try to help people start, is to take a closer look at the kinds of questions that they're asking.
Mm.
I find that a lot of folks, when they begin to try to imagine their future, and like you said, if they have an inkling of like, maybe there's more, maybe I have been in a little bit of an autopilot zone, but I don't want to continue that way. Often what happens next is they kind of get struck by an avalanche of questions. I
Mm.
think that's human nature for a lot of us, where it's like, okay, maybe I want this, but am I qualified for that? Can that even happen? Or well, how would I afford that? Or what does that look like? Or maybe am I allowed to do this? I noticed when I did my 40-day thing, I was planting tomatoes and being like, am I allowed to do this today? And it comes up, right? But I think it also happens in the bigger things, like trying to think about your future. Oftentimes a million questions that come up. How would I handle this? How is that possible? So oftentimes what I notice for that stage is when you're in that mode, it's very hard to figure out what do you genuinely want, because it's getting so drowned out by questions like this that are often quite loud. But in my experience, really being able to listen to yourself and to your desires, it requires those questions are quieter, or those desires are often a little bit quieter. But these kinds of questions, partially how I describe them, is they're very loud.
Mm.
They're kind of shouting at you, like, again, a lot of fear, sometimes anxiety, shame, or these limiting things. So in the book, described 4 different types of questions:
Mm.
permission questions, pragmatic questions, competency questions, and capitalistic questions. I find that most of the questions that tend to come up that are largely, usually more than 50% unhelpful, are these types of questions, like permission questions. Do I actually have permission to do this? Who's going to be mad at me if I do this?
Mm.
Pragmatic questions, like, is this even possible? Like, why even say that I want this thing if it would never happen in the first place?
Mm.
Probably totally out of the realm of possibility. So why bother? Competency questions are like related to that, which is like, even if I wanted this, like, am I qualified? Do I
Mm.
have what it takes? Will I be able to have the capacity, the abilities to make that happen? And then capitalistic in the sense of just money. Like, could I
Mm.
afford this? Isn't this way too expensive? How would that even happen? And what I've noticed is when those questions are front of mind, or we're not being conscious or intentional with how we're interacting with those questions, they can take over.
Mm.
And that's all we do, is just a loop of these questions, and they can go on and on and on, and they're endless, and they kind of keep us stuck.
Mhm. Mhm.
So the image of that I think about for this is, these questions are really bad drivers. Actually, you do not want these questions in the driver's seat. They're not unimportant. So they have a place. I'm not somebody who's ever going to tell anybody like, well, don't worry about, the reality is just like rage quit your job and do whatever. Like I'm just far too practical. And when I was thinking about all this stuff, I was like, I got bills to pay. I got mouths to feed. You got to keep it grounded in some of those realities. So I'm very sympathetic to folks that are in that. But I also tell folks it's not helpful in the beginning. Mm-hmm. Your desires need a little bit more breathing room. You need to give it a little bit space. You can ask these questions, sure, but let's pause it. Mm-hmm. So one of the things, if anybody listening is finding themselves like, oh yeah, that's me. One very simple thing you can do is just to brain dump all the questions that you're asking and then start to notice, like, what kinds of questions are these? Are they largely pragmatic questions? Are they largely competency questions? Are there nice little mix of all of the above? I've seen it all. And so I call this a question parking lot. And it's just a way to say, yep, these are the questions I'm asking. I don't need to feel bad about that or beat myself up about that, but that's human. A lot of us do this. And it's just a way to give it some place to live rather than taking over everything. And then if you can put pause on those questions, then I think you can start to ask a better set of questions, which is, who am I? What makes me come alive?
Yes.
What do I genuinely desire? And how might I learn how to weave that into the reality of my life? Mm-hmm. Those are the good driver questions you want in the driver's seat. But sometimes we gotta put the other ones to the side to even be able to give ourselves space to hold those. Mm-hmm. So that's a good starting place that I have seen work well for a lot of folks, especially again, if you're someone who is thoughtful. I've had the word overthinkers, like say, I'm an overthinker, so I totally do this. So if that's you, then I think giving yourself the ability to just like put a pin in some of those questions, and you can come back to them later. But if you do it too soon, then there's no breathing room for the right question.
Yeah, I wonder if you see any connection in those that in your own experience or those that you work with. If we don't take the time to pause to ask those values types questions, like who do I want to become or who am I becoming, more than focusing on what I'm going to be doing, those types of questions, if we don't push pause on those, how often we just may end up maybe in a new environment, but still with the same desire questions having gone unanswered because we never took the time to realign our values or focus on like, who do I want to be? Like, what type of friend, what type of employee, what type of spouse, father, mother, whatever it is, like whatever the thing is, what type of individual do I want to be in the midst of whatever it is that I'm finding myself doing? So I don't know if I necessarily have a question there, unless you have further insight or something that you might want to speak to that.
Well, I mean, I think I would just say, I think that's where autopilot living happens, is because we feel these things. We feel, there's an author that I have really appreciated. Her name is Emily P. Freeman, and she talks about how you want what you want, whether or not you admit it to yourself. Those desires are there. Those things are there. So we feel those things, but if we don't ever, like you said, stop to reflect on some of those deeper questions, I think what happens is we still feel the effects of that, but we don't, there's nothing generative, there's nothing, positive about anywhere for that to go. And so I think that's where autopilot happens, because it's not that we don't know, we're not feeling those things. Like oftentimes people will be able to describe, like, this is not working for me. I'm not happy in this situation, but oh well.
Yeah.
This is the best it gets. And, I don't know. I've heard people, in bad, say, work situations be like, well, I don't know. Anywhere you go is not going to be perfect. So I might as well. I'm like, yeah. but it could be a better fit for you. So sure, sometimes the grass is greener on the other side, and we don't want to fall into that. But at the same time, I'm also like, sometimes the grass is greener, so you do need to explore. You need to give yourself some space. But if you're never doing that, then I think that's where you end up feeling kind of stuck, or that's where people start saying things like, I feel like I'm living my life on autopilot, because you haven't given yourself enough room to cultivate creativity or your sense of agency, or these things that I think help you get to a place that is better aligned for who you are.
Yeah. A few years back, I was being coached by this individual, and he kept bringing me back to I know you've got all these ideas about what to do, but the work that he kept me grounded in was like that becoming work and doing the values and the identity, and oftentimes the things that we do, which to some degree is okay, gets wrapped up in like who we are, and then if that changes, we have such a hard time envisioning or talking about or describing ourselves any other way than outside of from the thing that we've done. So yeah, that definitely hits home with me. I also had a thought. You're an Enneagram coach too, or you work with the Enneagram?
I'm certified in the Enneagram, yeah.
Yeah, so I just also had a thought that I wonder if there is any correlation between the types and the types of questions. Like if they were to do a brain dump of the questions, like do certain types tend to ask permission questions? Do other types focus more on? That would be an interesting little case study.
I love that. I've never thought of that. That's very interesting. Yeah, I need to go ask a bunch of people what they think. That's very fascinating. I have not thought about that before, but that would be really fun to look at. The thing I have thought about is I believe that my working theory right now is that each Enneagram type has a different barrier to thinking about what they truly want and to engaging with their desires in a healthy way. Because I think for me as a 3, I'm a type 3. It's very easy, like I said, to get caught up in like, I want this thing because other people are telling me I should want it. And so now that's my reality. And so that it's like, the core sin of the Enneagram 3 is deceit, but it's deceit first and foremost of ourselves. Like I am not even aware that I'm trying to put on something external. I'm just doing it, so, but I think for other types, they've described different types of barriers to me. So I think for like say an Enneagram type 1, that idea of what I want is like, no, that's wrong. That's and I'm very attuned to what's right and what's wrong. And this is definitely wrong. And this is not okay. Or like type 2s who are like, well, myself, like, what do I want? But no, I'm focused on what everyone else needs, and that's where my focus goes, so I think for each type, there can be a different sort of barrier, I think, to entering to that type of work.
Do you have it fleshed out enough? Like, could you just briefly speak to each type, or?
Oh, let's try. So those are 1 through 3. I would say, for type 4s, the things that I've heard them describe is, I think type 4s are naturally a little bit more connected to longing and to desire. That's something that is closer to their emotional experience. But I think the barrier can be actually not over romanticizing what they don't have and paying attention to the desires that are like closer in and more authentic. For type 5, I would say the thing that I've seen people describe or wrestle with is that type 5s can just kind of get in their own head about things. And so therefore just even asking themselves, what do they really want? What's embodied in that is a movement towards something more in their soul, in their gut, however you'd want to describe that. And it's because they can kind of stay more in their head about that thing. For type sixes, I think for a lot of type sixes, they are one of the there's a lot of beautiful strengths about type six. I'm married to one. But I think one of the struggles can be kind of the overthinking, the going around in loops and the like, I might want this, but I don't know if it'll work. And so they sort of stay stuck in motion, and it's harder for them to take action towards their desires because they just are in that thinking loop about it, mostly about like, what if it doesn't work out? What if the fears? And then it sort of can show up as like a little bit of perfectionism almost, like, well, I'm not going to do it if I don't know that it's going to be perfectly done right. Type sevens, I think, again, are the types that are aware of desires and are aware of that. But I think I've heard the work for them oftentimes is learning how to listen to themselves and maybe pay attention to not just their desires, but their desires in the context of unpleasant things that they might be tempted to ignore, and to almost take the full picture of their desires, not just like, oh yeah, I want to do this. I want to, have these experiences or go after that. Type 8s are another type that they've told me like they're like, no, we don't struggle with that. I know what I want. I'm going for it. So that one has me a little bit stumped. Type 8s, if you have thoughts on this, I need to do a little bit more asking about that one, because for the most of the 8s that I have in my life, they're like, no, that's not a struggle.
That sounds like a very 8 response.
Yeah, which is great, which is part of the reason why I love 8s. If anything, I would say, that is like nuanced, right? So I think it shows up differently, for a lot of the folks that I work with who maybe, who are women, have a different cultural experience. That's not always like cut and dry. So sometimes that like overlays onto it. And I do think that the energy of desire for some 8s, I think feels vulnerable. That's like their soft underbelly that they don't always show everyone that they have. That's real. But they don't always, depending on where they're at in their journey, they may or may not be willing to look at that. So if anything, I think it can show up there. And then for type 9s, I think these are the folks that tell me like, yeah, I don't know. I never know. This is very hard for me, and takes a lot of support, takes a lot of intentionality. I think for a lot of type 9s, they just are, there's like almost like an invisible barrier to even this realm. And that's why I think for a lot of those folks, starting baby steps, starting with little handholds, it starts to build that. Because a lot of type 9s are like, I have no idea. I just don't know. I don't think about this. And even if I try to think about it, I'm not aware. So it's almost like I'm asleep to these things, again, depending on where you're at with your journey.
Oh, thanks for going there. I've had several Enneagram experts and authors on the podcast, and so that's been a reoccurring theme throughout the podcast. So I appreciate you being willing to go there. And if you hear yourself in any of those barriers, that would certainly be worth exploring or at least considering. So, Tracey, can you tell us a little bit about the authentic alignment pathway? Can you walk us through those 4 stages?
Yeah, this is a process that I developed because I found more and more people coming to me to say, I know I need it. I'm in a transition. I have no idea what I want. I don't know how to imagine that. And in the beginning, I started to say, okay, well, I think we could have these conversations together. I think, it outlined sort of a process for that was based on things I'd gotten in my training, things that I had experienced in my life, and started to propose that to people. And then was like, oh my goodness, it's helping. It's working. Like, people are coming away with clarity. They're moving closer to this more alive version of themselves, and they're finding their fit for things, and they're making their path. And finding clarity that feels really good. And then I noticed over time, the more that started happening, that I was recommending the same things, the same conversations and the same sort of dialogue, and was noticing like, okay, when people come to me in that stage, or like confused, which I call desire fog, which is just like, I have no idea what I want. It feels really overwhelming. It feels really lonely. It feels really isolating, and just like, I have no idea where to begin. Like I remember one person telling me, I have no idea what I want, and I have no idea how I would even begin to figure that out. And so it became a way to say, okay, that's all right. That's real, but it's all right. If we have space to talk about these pillars of things, you're going to have more clarity on the end of it. And again, started to see that happening. So in the book, that's what I describe as the authentic alignment pathway. It is basically, like I said, it is those driver's seat questions. Each stage, there's 4, focuses on a different, what I call a primary question. So it starts with, who are you? How do we calibrate to that? How do we pay attention to what brings you alive and how you've been created by God? And then it moves to, this ability to not just like stay there, but begin to imagine possibilities, like what could be possible. So in that stage, I call that expansion. That's just like, let's think about all the possibilities, whether or not they're realistic, whether or not you think they could ever happen. Let's just look what's there. Like if Jesus showed up on your doorstep and asked you what you wanted, would you know what to say? So and then each stage has its own set of questions and exercises and reflections. So the reflection for that one is write down 100 things that you want. Don't edit yourself. Don't limit yourself. Don't think about what's realistic. Just free association. What is there? And I've had people come back to me and say, I didn't even know I wanted this. And this like brought my awareness to that. So that is just expansive, open, kind of the possibilities. And then it's moving to the next stage is called experimentation, which is all about learning how to take the right size action, oftentimes smaller than we might initially think, in order to build clarity. Because one of the paradoxes that I've noticed is that we tend to think like, okay, I need to get clarity and then I can do something.
Yes.
And I'm trying to help people reverse that a bit and say, if you can actually take a step, you're going to get better clarity than just thinking and thinking and thinking. And so, the way that I talk about this often is to notice that in your life, there are thinking questions and there are doing questions, and you just can't think your way through a doing question. You just got to get out there and try some things, but hopefully with support, hopefully in the right size, hopefully in a way that feels still motivating, that builds momentum. And again, isn't like the most extreme version of like, I have to move across the world and quit my job and, drain my bank account. Like, no, we can do this in ways that are smart, that feel right for you, that kind of thing. And the last stage is integration, which is like noticing the outcomes of that from those experiments. How do you work with that? How do you celebrate the wins, the successes, the things that were better than you thought? And how do you bounce back from the stuff that's disappointing or didn't go as well as you wanted it to, or sort of caught you off guard, or were the curveballs? Because that's just part of the process. And, one of the things I talk about in that stage is just how important it is to learn how to work with disappointment rather than trying to just avoid it, which is what a lot of people do. Like they say, I don't want to think about what I want or try to go for it because I might get disappointed.
Yeah.
And, what I would say to that is, yes, it is terrible. I've been there. I've been in that emotional pit of how painful disappointment can be, but I still think there are worse things than disappointment. And if you can learn how to listen to it and work with it, it can actually get you closer to what you want rather than just being this like terrible negative thing that we must avoid at all costs. So that's a rough sketch of that pathway, which is just, again, to say like, here's some simple reflections, doable things, conversations you can have with people that know you and love you, and want to support you to begin to build clarity and a sense of what alignment looks like in you, in your life. And this is something that can also change over time, because sometimes people are like, I used to be crystal clear in what I wanted, but now, the ground shifted underneath me and I need to revisit that. I just heard from someone that it was really meaningful. She said she read the book and it was helping her re-envision her life after the grief of losing her mother, which was this really significant event in her life. And, she wasn't sure what to make of things out of that, but it was helping her kind of build that sense of clarity and momentum for herself.
That's so good. So that pathway is mapped out in Tracey's book, The Magic of Knowing What You Want. Do you have time for a couple more questions?
Yeah, I'm great.
Okay, cool. So looking back at your own journey, like if you could tell your younger self just like one thing about what do you wish you knew about the value of unearthing the wisdom of desire?
If I could tell my younger self something about that, I would say I'd probably tell her to start with that first stage of the pathway, which again in the book I call calibration. And it's to really, and I tell this to every young person that I get the chance to talk to, and my own kids and my godkids, is to say, please pay attention to what truly brings you joy and lights you up and makes you feel alive. Write it down. Come back to it, like keep that in a file, in a journal, and somewhere where you're just noticing what that is. And because that is the seed bed for everything else that follows from that. And the more that you can pay attention to that and know how sacred that is and how rare and beautiful that is, the better chance you're going to have at building that life and thinking about your desires in the context of who you are. And again, that a unique way that you image God, because the fallacy that a lot of people do and that I did when I was younger is like, this doesn't matter. Anybody could do this. Anybody would do well at this, or anybody would enjoy that, or whatever. And I so quickly dismissed those things. And it wasn't until much later in my life when I gained some tools and training, like, oh, no, this is actually really, really important stuff. It is not the same for everyone. I've talked to so many people about their stories. And what I can say for sure is that something that you love and enjoy and that lights you up and is you like at your best, that is some of the most sacred stuff that you can pay attention to. And it is completely rare and unique to you because everyone's is different. As someone that has, again, had the honor and the privilege of listening to these journeys and experiences over and over and over again, they are always unique. They're always really special to the person. And the more that you can learn to pay attention, to notice it, to study it almost, like nerd out on it, the better chance you're going to have at paying attention to the right markers for the things that are truly right for you and that are not. And I just didn't know how to do that for myself. And I dismissed a lot of those things early on. And I wish I could go back and tell her, like, don't overlook this. It's really important.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with you so much. Okay, last question. What does flourishing mean to you nowadays?
I am in a stage of my life where, so I'm in my 50s, and I think flourishing to me, it feels very small and simple at times. It's as simple as, like, I went for a walk with my friend the other day and we just had a beautiful time just walking through the hills at dusk. Great conversation. So I think it's a lot about those simple things, a lot about relationships and community. And oftentimes now too, I don't know if this is getting older, like paying attention to trees and birds and nature, like this, it really speaks to me. And then also, to the point of what we've been talking about, I think just really having a lot of space to lean into the stuff that I truly love and that I feel like is, my version of Christmas morning. Like I get to wake up and work with people the way that I love to. That is very meaningful to me as well.
I love that, Tracy. And I'm happy for you because it sounds like you are getting to just lean into the things that make you come alive. So that's fantastic. Where can people find your new book, and where can they connect with you, follow your work? Where do you want to send them?
Few places. Thanks for asking. The book is anywhere you want to buy a book. So whether that's your local independent bookstore or you like to use the bigger spots, it's pretty much everywhere that will sell you a book. Where I am, I dabble in LinkedIn, but I'm mostly on Instagram as far as the social streets. So I like to be there. I like to have those conversations. And so that's been a place I like to be. And then on my website, which is traceyg.me/template, there's a tool that I've offered for free that is a way to think about like a span of your life, like say at the beginning of the year or for like this last part of 2025. It's a way to kind of vision for your life and to focus it around some of these more desire-based goals and ways to kind of think about that. So that's a tool that I've offered or a resource that folks have used for that kind of thing.
Love it. Excellent. Well, Tracey, thanks again for the conversation and for sharing all of your valuable wisdom and insight. So much appreciated and very much enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. I loved being here.